Hi, everyone. You can hear me? The most sustainable coffee festival in the world. It's such a pleasure to be here at Nordic Coffee Fest. It's my first time in Gothenburg. Sustainability is an interesting word. I actually studied in University of Waterloo under the Faculty of Environment in urban design, and it was all about sustainability. But over time, you started to realize it gets a little bit of a bad rap. And I think it's because of, there's a lot of companies maybe greenwashing, it's becoming very trendy, but it's so nice to see when a group like this, Nordic Coffee Fest, really pulls it off and really puts their full energy and effort into it. And I think sustainability is interesting because it's our natural state of being is to be sustainable. It's only been over time that we've trying to push the boundaries, sometimes a little bit too much. And so we have to kind of think back to old times, how we used to live, how we used to eat, how we used to go about our lives. I want to take that to coffee today. As was mentioned, exploring the global trends and cultural traditions of coffee. And so let's start off with a quick question. For coffee, how far would you go? Down the block? Would anyone go across town to their favorite coffee shop to get a good coffee? Okay, we got a few hands. I feel like because of all of you here at this event, many of you would travel quite far to come. Who has traveled the farthest to come to Nordic Coffee Fest? Where are you coming from? Thailand, Brazil, Romania. My next question is, how far does coffee travel to get to you, right? So we might travel across town. We might go across the continent in some cases, of course, over oceans for some of you. But how far does coffee travel? So I did a quick calculation. I actually just used ChatGPT and I asked it, what's the farthest coffee producing country from Gothenburg? Right? So we got 12,960 kilometers. That's the farthest that coffee might travel in its green form to get somewhere, well, at least to get to us, right? It's amazing how far coffee would go. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about your own coffee experiences. Can anyone share with me their most unique coffee experience that they ever had? Something that really stood out to you, maybe it was a life-changing experience.
Hello. I think when I was living in Melbourne, I was working in a bar, and there was these ladies that traveled from Sydney to Melbourne to this bar just to get a good coffee, and I did not understand what's the difference there, really. When the barista explained to me and poured up 10 different shots in different ways, I realized that there's so much more behind coffee. And I think that experience was what got me more into specialty coffee 12 years ago. And then it's been many other beautiful experiences and stories after that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's why we're all here. Probably most of us had an experience similar to that, whether it was subtle or very life-changing. I definitely did to get me into specialty coffee. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, people will travel for coffee and it will make an impact. Avocados. Who here hates avocados? Maybe some of you are not willing to admit it because it's become quite a trendy food over the last few years. Maybe not the most popular, but definitely the most trendy. Maybe partially because of specialty coffee, this brunch culture, and especially the Australian. We were talking about Melbourne and Sydney. They kind of popularized avocado. When I was younger, I hated avocados. Okay, so I grew up hating avocados, other things, very particular things like olives, seafood, hated it for some reason. In high school, I met a guy from Mexico. He was studying in my hometown. He was a skateboarder, I was a skateboarder. We connected over skateboarding, and my mom said, why don't you come over, bring your friend over? And she asked him, hey, can you make us like some guacamole in your own traditional style? And I was like, he's gonna make guacamole, okay. And because he did that, and because I had this connection with him as a friend, and I wanted to learn more about Mexican culture, I decided I'm going to try this guacamole. And from that moment on, I was a fan of avocados. I wasn't that I didn't like avocados, I didn't. But because I had this cultural experience with avocados, I was able to reframe flavor, right? And my tongue didn't change from one day to the next. So let's apply that to specialty coffee. What is specialty coffee? I think most of you here have quite a bit of experience with it. We might say that it's 80 plus points on the grading scale. We might talk about the transparency of the price, the origin, where it comes from, the traceability, also the process, the service. We talked about Melbourne before, people serving coffees in a new way. Of course, you go to all the Roasters Village here, you're going to see so many different types of brewers, different types of coffees. It's about service. It's about where it comes from. You might use these types of equipment. Some of you recognize some of these. Like you might walk down a street and see a cafe and think, oh, that's a specialty coffee shop because it's got this grinder, it's got this espresso machine, they've got a WDT, so they must know what they're doing. Or you walk into someone's home and you see this. You see two different espresso machines, one white, one black. I think probably just took that for the, set it up for the photo, but still it's funny. But I would argue that this is also specialty coffee, right? So most of you might recognize some of these images, Vietnamese, Cafe Fin, the Jebena in Ethiopia, Ethiopian coffee ceremony, and of course, Arabic coffee with the dalla. So these are the origins of serving coffee and really making coffee an art, right? So this has been around for centuries. I would argue that's still a form of specialty coffee. I believe that coffee has played a really big role in shaping our cultures, and so the subtext of this talk could also be how can we preserve and honor cultural traditions in coffee as we move forward as an industry, as we continue to innovate. Let's look back, just like we spoke about with the sustainability. So a little bit about me. My project has always been the Nomad Barista since it started when I was in China. I was living in China for a year, 21 years old, didn't know anything about coffee, but I was living in Yunnan, one of the coffee growing regions, and I just started to have this cultural connection with, the coffee can be grown not even that far away from me. Coming from Canada, that's it's a very different concept. And so I got into coffee there. It's just starting to bloom, let's say. And then over the years, came back to Canada, got into specialty coffee, went to Europe, explored the coffee houses of Europe and specialty coffee in the form of espresso, not something that I was particularly knowledgeable about coming from Canada. And then a few other places, Latin America, Turkey, Japan. We'll get to that in a second. I started a blog called the Nomad Barista. This was during a bike trip across Spain where I was just exploring different coffee shops across Spain. And I think we got this photo in Barista Magazine. I think Sarah Allen is walking around somewhere here. But also got into a little bit of coffee consulting in Toronto and Barcelona. Started my YouTube channel, right? So I wanted to share coffee cultures around the world by using one of the most popular mediums, video. And so I started doing YouTube videos. And this is a recent trip to Istanbul, for example. I opened a cafe for a short time in Toronto and started to do more coffee-related experiences there. And then my main focus, so this is something that I'm really, really diving into these days. It's kind of my next approach, is really tying it back to film, doing documentaries, doing photojournalism in coffee-related context. So if any of you have a really cool, exciting coffee project that you want to share with me or talk to me about, I'm also very interested in being a part of it, because that's something that I'm very passionate about. Story time. Maybe for some of you, we talked about traveling all the way here to Gothenburg. Let's say hypothetically, I'm on a journey. I take a 5-hour plane ride. I take a 2-hour train ride. I hop on a bus. I find a bike somewhere along the way, do a half-hour bike ride, and I end up here. Does anyone know where this is? We got a Berlin. No. If you look really, really closely, there's a little hint in there. If you're Dutch, there's some little Dutch, my mom used to call them windmill cookies, but I think they have a different name. The point is, this is in Antwerp. It's a very nice cafe, but the point is, we don't know, right? Because this world of specialty coffee has gotten to the point now where they're getting more or less the same, the different coffee shops. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think that's a really interesting form of growth and innovation, and it shows that this global coffee culture is really catching on around the world. But this is just an example. I love this shop. It's really cool. But we're going to play a little bit of a game here, a little bit more guessing game. So who can tell me where this first one might be? The U.S.? Yeah, that's actually in New York City. How about this one? Canada, Vancouver. This one over here? Some of you might recognize this. Barcelona, Nomad. This is Satan's Coffee Corner. How about this one over here? Maybe a little bit more obvious. On the left, this is Japan. This is Tokyo. It's called About Life. How about this one in the middle? Korea, Seoul, Korea. And how about this one over here? Where in Thailand? So this is a cafe called A Day in Chiang Mai. Beautiful shop. But again, the point is, these could be anywhere. How about this? Where is this? I probably didn't even need to put Starbucks, but tell me. So we got Italy, no. San Francisco, New York, Japan. Someone say Japan? So that's the point, right? It could be anywhere. But it is, in fact, in Tokyo, and it's a really cool, big, open space. So the point of sharing all this is the more we globalize, I'm just wondering, there's a lot of advantages. There's a lot of growth that's happening. All these people here are for specialty coffee. But what do we lose along the way? That's what I'm curious about exploring and just seeing how we can discuss it and find some answers along the way. Okay, so let's look to some other industries. We were talking about sustainability. What about food? So what's interesting about food is back in the day, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, all we had was whole foods, right? You had local whole foods, probably organic, and then it started to transition, started to put more industrialization, more processed foods. It started to go the other direction. We didn't even think about it. We didn't even know. We didn't know it was bad for us. And now we're coming back to whole foods, organic. Let's just simplify. Let's get take some sugar out of there. Wine, we got natural wine back in the day, Georgia, right? It came from Georgia, around there. And then over time, it became more industrialized. It's not bad. I've had some really great regular wines. I live in Spain. But natural wine is coming back. It's something interesting, right? Urbanism. So sprawl, suburbs. Me coming from North America, this is very common. Suburban homes. Now we're coming back to urban living and kind of living in closer communities. Agriculture, similar to food. Transportation, people are taking the bike a lot more. Maybe there was a big surge of just driving everywhere. Now we're coming back to how can we make walkable communities? Traceability in general, people are really getting into where are the things coming from that we're consuming. Coffee is obviously the big obvious one, but could be clothing, could be your food from the grocery store. Those were things we just knew. We just knew from the earlier communities, small towns, you knew where you got your beef from. It was from the local butcher who had the farm. Okay, so this is interesting. Social media, or media in general, right? So media came out, printing press, we got the newspaper, it was just, and then we have radio, we have TV. This was kind of long form content. You took your time. You sat down in front of the TV, you might listen to the radio for hours on end, and then it became, boom, TikTok, Instagram, 1 minute, 15 seconds. Very polished, right? Very polished videos a lot of the time. But we're coming back to this moment where maybe podcasts are starting to come back in. Long-form conversations where you can really get into the nitty-gritty. In terms of videos, it's becoming very raw. TikTok, particularly, is very raw. People can just upload something. It doesn't have to be super polished. It doesn't have to be extremely professional. Maybe some of you can guess where this is. Where is this? Japan, right? So this is a coffee shop in Kyoto. Old, looks super old. I don't know how old, but looks kind of more traditional. This is Arabica, also in Kyoto. But I love the comparison of the architecture here, how they were able to preserve some of the older styles, but do it in a very beautiful way and maintain that. And it's unmistakable where this is if you've ever been to Japan. This is pretty cool. This is a old car, right? So we got this kind of winged Mercedes, and they've maintained this. It's just really cool how they've maintained that over the years, and it's obviously different, but it's part of the lineage there. How about fashion, right? This is clearly Duomo, if I'm not mistaken. And then we've got another sort of much more modern, could say Italian-style fashion, but it's very similar in the approach. They've maintained that style. Okay, another game. Where is this? Ethiopia? Tamoka. So this is in Addis Ababa, one of the older coffee shop projects in Ethiopia. So it's more identifiable, right? What about this one? Where is this? Anyone know? So this is Saudi Arabia. You can kind of tell by the headdress. This is a very Saudi Arabian, but he's got the dallas down here. He's doing Arabic coffee. How about here? Turkey. Yeah. I mean, it could be Morocco, but you could see the Turkish jezvas. So I've got this one up here. We're going to talk about this in a second. This is the jezva. This is the coffee grinder. How about this one? Paris, Italy. Yeah, this is in Italy. This is kind of the pinnacle of espresso culture where we get a lot of the espresso vibes. And then coming back to recurring theme here. This is a Japanese kisaten, right? So this is a traditional style of serving coffee in a very slow environment. So to me, I show you these because it shows how you can potentially connect back to the coffee cultures of the world, and you can preserve those cultures as we move forward. Who knows what this is? Any Swedes in the audience? How do you call it? Kaffee ost, maybe? Yeah, it's like the cheese bread with coffee. By the way, this is something that I really want to experience. I've never experienced it. So this is interesting. I haven't seen that much of it, at least not in this festival. This could be actually a great space to showcase Swedish coffee traditions, but haven't seen it yet. So let's discuss a little bit of coffee's influence on the cultures of the world, because I think it's fairly obvious that cultures of the world have influenced coffee, but how has coffee actually influenced the different cultures? So we're going to start, obviously this is Ethiopia, Yemen, kind of the legend of Kaldi with the goats. But we're going to skip forward. We're going to go to 14th century Yemen. This is where coffee cultivation really started to take off. And it was actually the Sufi monks that used coffee in order to stay awake during their long night of prayer. It also had an influence on the other local cultures in the area for religious purposes and also medicinal contexts. Right? So we jump forward, 16th century, Ottoman Empire and the surrounding the regions, Persia, Turkey, Syria. And so people started to consume more coffee in homes. Right? So again, coming back to the Turkish coffee, but also going out and sharing coffee in a what they would call a kahvehane, which is these coffee houses. So the cultural tradition of preparing coffee. 17th century, it started to become introduced to Europe, right? So this is actually a coffee house in Austria, I believe, but this is like the slow integration from, as you can see, there's a more Ottoman-looking Turkish man here serving coffee for everyone. And so this started to open up an intellectual exchange. This is the thing that I find very interesting. Probably happened in Turkey in the kahvehanes as well. But has anyone heard the term penny universities? No? So this is something that actually popped up in London as coffee houses started to become more popular in London around this time. It was a space where you could come to a coffee house and you could just sit. Maybe there's like a few different corners of the place where they're discussing different topics, politics, science, food, whatever it happened to be, religion, and you could get an education, a university education, just paying a penny for your coffee. And you come in, you drink a bunch of coffee, talk to a bunch of smart people, and you learn. And it's kind of democratized in that way. So that was very interesting for European social life. A little bit of our darker past, the darker history in terms of coffee and how it spread around the world with colonization. But it did have a big influence on promoting and expanding this very massively consumed beverage. I'm glad that we are finally getting back to being able to do this in a sustainable way, not only for the environment, but also for the people who are involved. But that was the reality in the 18th century during the plantation times. 20th century innovation, right? So we got the espresso machine. This really started to launch more coffee consumption, especially here at the bar. People are drinking coffee, they're drinking espressos, they're getting together. And then the last one here, maybe much more relatable to a lot of you here, is the 21st century. But this is really where the barista themselves have started to become the expert, right? So you're going in there, you're talking to the barista. They're the ones who are really crafting your drink. They know a lot about coffee, similar to how maybe in the past, you might go to a restaurant and you go to a restaurant because of that star chef, right? Or maybe it's like a Michelin star restaurant. Now, the baristas, they really have a unique set of expertise, like this woman pouring a pour-over for someone. And then, of course, home brewing is another part of it. A lot of people getting into home brewing. Our friend Alex talked about home brewing yesterday in terms of this surge, especially in the last 3 years, and people documenting it online and educating. Again, it's like the next phase. People are educating not only in cafes, but also on social media, which is very interesting. So where are we now as a coffee industry? Here's a few examples for how I feel like we've taken inspiration from the past and we've been able to move forward. So as you see here, very, very old Turkish coffee grinder. I've brought one up here in case anyone wants to come and check it out later. Come talk to me. This is a modern hand grinder, right? So this has been developed last year. It's a brand that I work with called WACACO, but there's so many different types of hand grinders now that concept has been preserved over time, of course refined, but now you can, and it's very sustainable. Coming back to the whole sustainability, you're using your hands and not electricity to grind coffee. How about fermentations, right? So early days, coffee would just ferment normally, just like we're talking about natural wine. It would come off the tree. Maybe they take the cherry off, the mucilage. Well, here's a more modern approach. This is a special experimental fermentation in a closed bag. This is actually a place in Nicaragua that I visited. So they're doing some sort of anaerobic style. What about coming back to the actual production itself, right? So again, back in the day, Ethiopia, a lot of places, they would just have coffee growing in the forest, and it would be shade grown, right? Sometimes at very high elevations. I'm sure those were great coffees. Now we're coming back to the concept of let's do shade grown. Let's have a lot of foliage. Let's have natural streams coming through. Let's utilize bee populations, some bee populations that may be actually dying out. Let's bring them to areas where they can thrive with the coffee plants and the coffee flowers, and they can. It's that symbiosis that we were talking about. Another one here, just like pour-overs. This is the early iteration of the modern pour-over. Melita Benz, right? 1908 or so, and she came up with this. Now we've got a whole range of different pour-overs, but same concept. You're pouring water over coffee. It's dripping down. You get some delicious black stuff. So where are we going from now on, right? What's the future? Now, some of these could actually be controversial depending on where you stand, but I think that I'm going to give you 4 examples that I think we're starting to move in that direction, and one of them is automatic brewing. But I'm going to talk about how they also link back to the past. So I don't think this is pure, future thinking. Let's just forget everything from the past. I believe that we need to know where we came from in order to know where we're going. Automatic brewing, to me, is kind of like going to the diner, right? So back in the day, diner coffee had its charm. Some people really like that. What do they like? They like the experience with the host, right? They like the experience with the waiter or the server serving their coffee. They get to have a conversation. But the server is not back there sort of like geeking out about the coffee and making sure that it's dripping down perfectly. No, they're bringing you your coffee. You're having a great experience. Automatic brewing can potentially bring that back, I think, right? Because you have a great machine. There's a few automatic espresso machines now that are doing great coffee, sometimes even better than what a barista could do in some cases. Not to knock any baristas out there. What about augmented reality, AR? I haven't seen this done. Has anyone seen AR integration in coffee context at all? I'm really curious to hear more about this. So AR is all about being in a space, but being able to bring something to that space by using our phone, right? Maybe we're using our phone or maybe some goggles or whatever. So what if you were in a cafe and you had a little corner of your cafe where you could scan a QR code of your coffee, and you could do an AR experience where someone, like this Ethiopian woman, is there doing an Ethiopian coffee ceremony right there in the cafe because of AR, right? And you're able to sip that, you're able to have that cultural experience. And I'm sure we could think of many more iterations on that. How about automated roasters, right? So I still don't know how I feel about this, right? There's a lot of really amazing roasters out here in the Roasters Village. They're doing a great job in their roasteries, but there are companies that are developing automated roasters for cafes. So there's that option now, which again, another example of this recurring theme of Ethiopian coffee. If you go to an Ethiopian restaurant, most times now, they'll roast the coffee in front of you, right? This is just, they have the green beans, they roast the coffee in front of you, you get to smell the aromas, and then they brew it right there. Now, that's kind of the same concept here, right? So they're roasting in front of you, you can see that traceability. Maybe that's an innovation. And the next one, very popular these days, how are we using AI to advance, to move forward in the coffee industry? Now, it's a little bit harder to tie back to history when we talk about AI. It's a very new form of technology, but I think it ties back to the idea that we want to take some of the older, let's say using AI to develop new strains that are more resistant to disease or climate change fluctuations and things like that, right? So we're using AI to really help us to advance those older varieties. Maybe we find an old variety that's like, wow, this is very good if it could use a bit of tweaking and it could operate really well in this new environment. In fact, I was talking to one roaster here yesterday about how a few farms in Central America were actually able to bring some, I think it was Ethiopian varieties or Burundi varieties or different coffee varieties from Africa and bring them to Central America where they're actually really thriving well in that specific context. So as we confront climate change and these different regions start to change, how can we use AI to help us develop the right move forward? But one thing really is for sure, and that is that coffee brings people together. That's why we're all here. It's one of those things. It's a community activity. But how can we preserve and honor the traditional coffee cultures while moving forward? That's my question. I don't think it's the only answer. I'm not saying we have to go back 200 years. I'm saying how can we honor these coffee cultures that have made coffee what it is today? That's just a reality. We drink coffee today because in Ethiopia they found the beans and they started roasting them, and in Turkey they started serving coffee in a jezva in coffee houses, and it started to evolve that way. Coffee is kind of like food. It's always brought people together, but I think what's unique about the coffee or the cafe concept is that it's much more fluid, right? So you can have a cafe in an urban environment. People can come in for 2 minutes and they can leave. They can come in for 3 hours, they can leave. You get to know people. And so I'd like to ask if you have any potential answers to this question? Does anyone in the audience have a thought for how, how we can preserve coffee traditions as we move forward and innovate in the industry?
If you create a culture of awareness within your coffee shop about these methods, that's one way of preserving it, and maybe having a diverse menu of coffee options. I don't know when's the last time I saw a Turkish coffee in a coffee shop. We've been in Europe.
Right.
I don't remember when's the last time. So I think that might be a way.
Some of you might have more answers and more questions later. Definitely come find me. Let's chat. Happy to have all of you here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining. I think I'm right on time. So come find me, and I'd love to chat more about this concept, how we can look back to move forward. So thank you, everyone.